Well, just a reminder, we're going to have the book, my book, Pandemic Busters, the 22 things we need to be improving our immunity. A lot of the material, you're going to find it there in the book that we're going to cover today. And I'm going to be citing some of my research. You can find it there on that ResearchGate page, as well as I'm going to be citing some of my tweets, and you can go and get those tweets there, Eddie RDMD. So let's talk about fish, the environment, and health. You know, there's many people that on a regular basis, they are eating their fish and so forth, but many don't realize the implications that this can have on their health. There's no question about it that omega-3 has many therapeutical benefits. One of the factors that increase inflammation in the body is something called arachidonic acid. And omega-3 helps regulate some of that arachidonic acid, helping you fight inflammation. And even people that struggle with things like rheumatoid arthritis, they're going to tell you, you know, when I take that omega-3, it looks like I feel a little bit better and so forth, secondary to that inflammation. And also, it has a cascade of effects. It's not just one thing that stops not only the arachidonic acid, but other mediators that cause inflammation. Omega-3 can help with that. And another factor that has been studied is that it can help stabilize plaques. When heart disease is occurring, you have this plaque that is forming in the artery, and many times that plaque can be very fragile. So if it breaks that plaque, that can potentially create a clot there, and that's going to give you a stroke, a heart attack. Omega-3 actually helps stabilize some of that plaque. Another advantage is that it can help with platelet aggregation. When the platelets get together, that can actually potentially give you some clot that can get stuck somewhere there in your body, like your arteries of your heart and so forth, and that's not good, your legs and so forth. And there's also some interesting research on arrhythmias and even lowering the triglycerides. So among the problems that can help with omega-3, as I was mentioning to you previously, is rheumatoid arthritis. As the body is fighting a lot the inflammation, rheumatoid arthritis can improve with that. Also, things like the skin, psoriasis, GI problems, ulcerative colitis, depression. We use that in our depression program. What we tell our patients of depression is that you need to eat some omega-3 at each meal. So one of the simplest ways is to use flaxseed, or you guys call it here linseed, and you grind that and you add 1 or 2 tablespoons of that to your oatmeal, to your salad, to your soup, or if you want to drink it, I prefer if you put it on the food, it's much better. So as you can see, there are multiple conditions that can improve with omega-3. And you know, you cannot patent omega-3, but recently, well, a few years ago, they came out with this medical grade omega-3, and they call it Lovasa. And this medication, they prescribe this, basically is omega-3 that they put in a special patented way to remove the toxins. Every omega-3 that comes from fish has toxins. So that special formulation supposedly has this patent way to remove a lot of the toxins. So when it first came to the market, they came to us to offer us that medication. And one of the questions that we asked them was, Okay, you're saying that you are removing toxins from this omega-3. How much toxins are still there? Good question, isn't it? If you're dealing with something that usually has high levels of toxins. So the pharmaceutical people said, well, we actually don't know that answer. Nobody has ever asked us that question. Why don't you write to the manufacturer of the medication and see, if they have that information. So yeah, went ahead and wrote a letter to them, and they answer saying it is impossible to remove all the toxins. So even though it has this patent way of removing the toxins, still some toxins remain. And this is my study, and in this study I cite another study. And that study that I cite gave us very worrisome results. In this study, they were documenting how today, they say in that study that I'm citing, every fish has mercury. There is not such thing as a mercury-free fish. In the old days, you could find mercury-free fish in the rural waters of Canada, in those lakes that are up north, and also in the waters of Alaska. Even there today, we are finding mercury. How is the mercury getting there? We still don't understand completely, but one of the theories is that through the water systems, the evaporation and so forth, as the concentrations of these toxins have increased worldwide, it's more easy to be carried with the rain and so forth. That's what we think. And in this particular study, what we were focusing on was to see what happens to the people that eat fish on a regular basis. And what we found out is that they actually have worse mental health compared to those that don't eat fish on a regular basis. This is a second one of my studies. This study, actually, I presented this study at the Toxicology Society. The Toxicology Society is the world's experts on toxins are there. These are the people that are, measuring the mercury in the lakes, in the oceans, and everywhere else. So as I'm having this conversation with these people that are actually in the field, they didn't tell me something like, oh, you're so conspiracy theorist, thinking that everything has mercury. No, they know these things. They're the ones that are actually measuring these things in the field. And in this particular study, we were showing how mental health gets worse when you expose the body to toxins. And this is another one of my studies. In this study, we were documenting how consumption of that mercury high fish decreases your emotional intelligence. So, in order to understand this concept of why these toxins are so harmful, we need to understand the concept of biomagnification. That is going to be the key word. If you want to go home and search more information about it, you want to search the word biomagnification. Biomagnification is what happens with toxins in the real life. Toxins accumulate not in a linear way, but in an exponential fashion. Let me give you an example. This is a study that was done in Northern California. There is this lake there that is called Clear Lake. Why do you think it's called Clear Lake? Because it's clear. It doesn't look like dirty and polluted and so forth. It looks like a clean lake. So the scientists went and sampled the water from that lake, And there is an insecticide still is being used. It's called DDD. DDD is a cousin of DDT. DDT is banned. You're not allowed to use that anymore because of international conventions. But its cousin, DDD, they still use it quite a bit. So when they sampled the water, it had 0.02 parts per million. So it's like super small amounts of that DDD. Now, when they went ahead and sampled the microscopic organisms that live in that water, those had 5 parts per million. Can you start seeing the difference between a 0.02 to a 5? That's a big jump, you know. And then when they sample the fish that eat those microscopic organisms, it had between 40 to 300 parts per million. Can you see where this is going? You know, these are serious concentrations already there. And then the carnivorous fish that eat the herbivorous fish had up to 2,500 parts per million. Those are tremendous numbers. Now, they didn't report, but what about the humans that eat that carnivorous fish? You can only imagine, isn't it, where these numbers are going. And that's the problem with fish. So that biological amplification is how, as things are eaten and go in that food chain, things start concentrating in an exponential fashion. So it may be in small amounts, but by the time you advance quite a bit on that food chain, the concentration is quite serious. So this biomagnification happens with multiple different types of toxins. It's not only just one toxin. Many toxins can go through that biomagnification process. For example, here is one with DDT. Even though DDT has been banned, still some of that remains in the environment. And here you can see the numbers, a little bit of DDT in the water, the plankton, the microscopic organisms that live in that water already had 800 parts per million. And then you have the insects, 11,600. Then the fish that eats the insects, 34,600. And then you have the swamps, 92,000. Can you see the effect here? Tremendous concentrations that occur as you go up the food chain. So anytime you go up a level, again, it's not linear, it's exponential. And little bit of it will result in very big concentrations later on. So the problem is that, as you can see, just little amounts of those toxins, as they concentrate very much, end up affecting our health. And that's why this needs to worry us. We need to be wise at taking the right choices so that we can consciously start to avoid some of these toxicities that we can if we are aware. So some of the most common pollutants come from coal burning power plants. That's still a very common source of how many countries generate their own electricity. So they start burning coal, and that smoke has a lot of toxins. Factories, farms, lawns, gardens. Today, many lawns, the grass, they add all kinds of chemicals there, to kill the weeds and this or that. rains come and wash those things, and they end up, pouring into lakes, into rivers, and even into the ocean. So some of the characteristics of some of the things that biomagnify, not all the things biomagnify, are the things that you can make soluble on water. Those types of toxins are the ones that we are going to see more biomagnification. So here is another example. Here you can see water had 0.00002 parts per million of this insecticide. Now, when we go to the microscopic organisms, the phytoplankton, the vegetable side of things, it had 0.0025 parts per million. Now, the microscopic animals that were eating those microscopic organisms, those ones had 0.123 parts per million. And then the rainbow smelt, this type of fish that was eating that microscopic animals, had 1.04 parts per million. And then the trout already had 4.83 parts per million. That's starting to be worrisome, that type of level. And then the gull that eats that fish, 124 parts per million. And you can see the eggs that were being put by that bird also had the 124 parts per million. So can you see the challenge here? You go ahead and eat that trout. What's happening to you? You start accumulating all these toxins, and that's not good, because those things, especially the nervous system, is something that can really be affected. So this biomagnification can also occur at the level of the land. So you have wheat, pests, farmers, and then the pesticides that are used. So first the mice, then the weasels, then the hawks. And what happens? Well, as this hawk is there. So first we start there with the wheat, then they put the insecticide, then the grasshopper comes and captures that. And that kills some of the bugs, but still some of that remains. Then the mice go and eat that. They concentrate that poison in the mouse. Now mouse 0.04 parts per million. And then the weasels go and eat the mice. And they're not going to eat just one mouse. It's going to eat many more. So that concentrates quite a bit. So as the weasel eats more, now it has 0.5 parts per million. So now 16,666 more concentrated. And now the hawk eats the weasel, and what? 2 parts per million. That's 666,000 times more concentration. So just a little bit pesticide that was that, it affected the mouse, which affected the weasel, which affected the hawk, and it starts going up and up the food chain. So the name of the game is to start eating as low as possible in the food chain. That's where we're going to see the least amount of concentrations. So things that can go through that process of biomagnification, number one and most worrisome of all happens to be mercury. See, there is not such thing as a safe limit of mercury. Even 0.0005 grams is too much. It's toxic to your body. The challenge with mercury is that it likes to go to your nervous system. Mercury likes to accumulate in your brain. You think that's good? No, because the neurons in your brain don't like mercury. You can damage those neurons by exposing them to mercury. So the more you expose to mercury, the more it accumulates. And one big challenge with mercury is that the body has a hard time eliminating the mercury. So the more you eat, the more it accumulates. And that's not good, because as it likes to go to your brain, increasing risk damage for dementia and this type of conditions. Also, it's not only mercury the problem, these POPs, or persistent organic pollutants. And this mercury, you find many sources like burning power plants with the coal that I was mentioning. Metal processing, especially gold, is one that they use a lot of mercury to separate that gold from the rest of the ore. And also certain medical uses and waste. Now, the challenge, as we mentioned previously on Monday, is that sometimes Australia tries to put certain limits on pollution and so forth, but your neighbors up north in Asia, sometimes they don't. So many times what they are throwing in the waters in Vietnam and what they're throwing in the waters in Cambodia and Thailand and so forth, unfortunately those things get carried in the ocean, and sooner or later it ends up catching up with us. So many times it becomes bioavailable by bacteria. So you have inorganic mercury that becomes organic once bacteria get involved. So the mercury goes in the bacteria, and then that one can go through that biomagnification. So you have the elementary mercury. That's the one, if you ever seen it with your own eyes, the one that looks like a little drop of water, color silver. You know, that's why they call it quicksilver. That's elementary mercury. But then the most toxic form is that methyl mercury. That's the one we usually find on every fish. And if you want to measure how much mercury a population has, we just need to ask one question. How much fish do you eat? If you answer that question, we can actually predict, you probably have a certain amount of mercury and so forth. So your muscles end up accumulating quite a bit. So as the fish get older, the more toxins that they were exposed, that's the higher amount of mercury fish. And what's the problem with eating all these toxins and so forth? Well, by eating the contaminated fish, worrisome is pregnant women and children. Those are the two highest risk groups from eating this mercury. And it's because that baby is being developed, so when you put that mercury there on that baby, it can interfere, especially with their brain, intellectual capacities and so forth. I'll show you an interesting case that happened in Europe regarding that. And also children, as a child is growing up, well, something that affects the neurons can affect big time that little baby. So statistics say that 600,000 children are born annually suffering with neural problems due to the fact that the mother, there was exposure there with high mercury to those babies. And in America, the FDA says that those fish that are very high in the food chain, the sharks, the swordfish, the king mackerel, the tilefish. Those are the ones that are eating, they're big fish, so they're able to eat a lot of it. And tuna should be there also, that they should be eating only, once a week. But that still is too much. How can you be recommending that for sure that they have mercury? Why are they recommending to eat that? So there's even a mercury calculator. Just go there to that gotmercury.org website, and you can actually make a calculation there of how much mercury you can potentially be getting exposed to and so forth. So the other worrisome part is this persistent organic pollutants, also called the organochlorines. And these ones, what worries us is that these are things that also biomagnificate. Just like the DDD that I show you, how it magnifies, the same story happens with this. And they can harm not only humans, but also the environment as they can concentrate there. The most common sources are pesticides, some plastics. We were talking about those microplastics on our first lecture, certain paints, industrial chemicals, bleaching, and burning garbage can increase these pesticides. So DDT, PCBs, dioxins are some of the most common ones. Now in 1995, the United Nations, they put a ban on 20,000 things that had, some of those POPs. Then in 2004, there was an important convention in Stockholm, and they banned the 12 worst, and I'm going to show you in a minute, what they call the dirty dozen. In America, even signed that in 2001, even though Congress never ratified it. So even though it's technically signed, Congress in America needs to pass it so that it can be official. So these are the dirty dozen. These are 12 of the worst POPs that you can get exposed to. So you have that DDT, that's why I told you it's banned. Technically, they're not supposed to use that anymore. You have those PCBs, even though they're banned, still some accumulation of that still occurs. Dioxins, they still are around those. Furans, aldrins, chloridane, dieldrin, endrin, the HCBs, those heptachlors, still is quite a bit of that, the Mirex, and the toxaphanes. So this in its pure forms are banned, but they still use some of the previous versions of this before it becomes the final product. So because they're using those previous ones, they can still form sometimes in the toxic form when you use too much of it. In my book, I talk about the dirty dozen fruits and vegetables. The dirty dozen fruits and vegetables are the fruits and vegetables that if you're gonna eat them, you should be preferring an organic version of it, because they tend to have very high levels of insecticides. For example, strawberries is the number one there. Strawberries, they spray that strawberry so much, that's a reason why if you're gonna be eating strawberries, much better idea to find an organic version. So all these 12, you can find it there in chapter 7 on my book. So this DDT, here is another example. So you have in the water 0.000003 parts per million. Then you have the microscopic organisms in that water, 0.04 parts per million. Then small fish, 0.5 parts per million. Then the big fish, 2 parts per million. And then the fish-eating birds, those have 25 parts per million. We're talking about 10 million times more concentrated. So can you see the issue? Exactly what I'm talking about. If you're eating the animal as it goes up the chain, tremendous amounts of concentration that you are being exposed to. And one of the problems with that DDT is that it lasts at least 15 years. In other words, after 15 years, it's going to eliminate half of it. So that's why I'm telling you, even though it's banned, that nobody's spraying DDT today, there's still plenty of this stuff in the environment because it takes a long time for this DDT to go away. That's the challenge. And the problem is that back in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, man, they were using, millions of tons of this stuff to spray everything because it's an excellent, pesticide. You get rid of the problem, but the problem is that this stuff stays in the environment. And now we're still seeing it today, even though it's not allowed to be used. So this is the Lovasa that I was telling you. That is the medication type of omega-3. So again, it's just omega-3, but what they did, they patented the way they remove the toxins. There's this excellent documentary. There's this islands called the Faroe Islands. If you go and check the map, you're going to see that you have England, and then north of England, there's some small little group of islands. That's where the Faroe Islands are. The Faroe Islands are just like Greenland, a colony from Denmark. So these people are very clean people, They're not throwing junk on the ocean and these type of things. And one of the main industries of the island happens to be fishing. And something that is documented there on that documentary, this was back from 2007, this was a while ago. They documented how the children of the island, their IQ started to go down. So the researchers were very worried. What's happening with these children? Why is their IQ coming down? After doing a thorough search and checking for every single detail, their conclusion? Their high exposure to sea products from the mothers that were pregnant and the little kids was introducing mercury and other toxins, and that was affecting the intellect of these babies. So that's exactly the problem that can occur. And there's also this documentary. This is an excellent documentary. It's called Farm Norwegian Salmon, World's Most Toxic Fish. And this is actually a documentary done by an Austrian group. It's very good. And I can testify of that. I actually speak Norwegian because I used to live in Norway. And I can tell you what it is showing there is very true. Due to the aquaculture that they're doing there in the fjords, as they're feeding this fish products that they usually don't measure. And that's why they're allowed to be feeding them these different chemicals and so forth. Those chemicals are being, because they use a lot for all these fish, they end up accumulating in the bottom of the fjords. So now the other fish that are going there, like the Norwegian salmon, are picking up all these toxins, so you end up exposing yourself to tremendous amounts of toxins by consuming that type of products. And look at this very interesting study. This is Journal Nature. Journal Nature is the most prestigious journal in the world. Only the very, very best richest journal, Nature. And here, notice the article that they publish. Ibis birds, which you guys have them here, you guys are experts on ibis, you know. The ibis birds that are exposed to mercury started behaving in a homosexual manner. And this was challenging because they were behaving in a homosexual manner. They were not reproducing and things like this, you know. So something to me that is a very interesting correlation is that if you remember, one of the first inhabitants of California were people searching for gold, if you know the history of California. So they used to process a lot of gold through mercury. I mentioned it from the beginning. Mercury is something that is used to separate the gold from the rest of the ore. And did you know, if you've ever been to San Francisco, you're going to see that there's these lakes inside, and then you have this piece of land with the water. Well, those lakes there still have a lot of mercury, which is something, isn't it, quite interesting. And one challenge also with the young people are these Bender-Gendin chemicals. We started mentioning a little bit about this last lecture, but these BPAs, if you were not here in the microplastic lecture, let me just remind you, many times BPA and BPS and other chemicals are added to plastics in order to make them more foldable, in order to make them more resistant, depending on what your end goal is with that plastic. And in this study, British Medical Journal, one of the top journals in the world, it found that these gender-bending chemicals are found in 86% of teenagers today. And one of the effects that these gender-bender chemicals can have is that they mimic the estrogen sex hormone. So especially worrisome are boys that are being exposed to this BPA. And they started increasing their use since the 1960s. And this is something that we're seeing worldwide, you know, how more teens are starting to identify as transgender. I actually have done some studies on the effect of sexuality and mental health. This is my study. In fact, they even invited me to the Congress of Sexual Medicine to share the results of my study. And in this study, we're documenting how sexual relationships outside of the context of marriage actually have a negative effect on the mental health. And this other one, also very interesting study. This is our data from our program. And what we found here is that people that are homosexual, bisexual, or that question their sexuality tend to have higher levels of mental health problems compared to the heterosexual population. And this other one also, I presented this one also in the sexual medicine meeting. And we found here, with our data here, that people that are bisexual, homosexual, or that question their sexuality have double the rate of probability of having been sexually abused in the past. That's what our data is showing according to that. Another very good documentary, if you're interested in the subject, is this documentary called The End of the Line. Excellent documentary. And in this documentary, they're showing how we are overfishing our oceans. The oceans don't have enough fish. If you were to wanted to feed all the humans with fish, there's just not enough fish in that ocean. So what ended up happening is that some of this fish is very hard to to find nowadays. So they end up, using techniques like this method that they put these nets in the bottom of the ocean and they just pull everything out of it. So you end up, think about it, it's like if you come here and you start putting bulldozers in the forest here or inland, what's going to happen? You end up creating deserts, isn't it? If you come and start taking everything on the way. That's exactly what's happening to our oceans as they are devastating tremendously the oceans. And the thing is that as the fish become more rare, the price is more expensive, which means they make more money, whoever does that. And it tells there the whole story, how even aquaculture is not the solution. Aquaculture is that method, you put some nets and then you put some fish there in a lake or in an ocean, but you still need to fish to feed those fish. So supposedly you're doing this so you can protect the fish that are out in the environment, but now you need to overfish in order to feed this one. Do you see the challenge here? It's this vicious cycle that you get into. And this one is one of the latest ones. This is an excellent documentary. This just came out a couple of years ago. It's called Seaspiracy. You can find it on Netflix, this documentary. And what this documentary is showing is that now, because of the legalities of some of these fish, are starting to be protected because the stocks are decreasing tremendously. So there's bans to fish certain fish and so forth. Well, what this is showing is that now the criminal groups are entering into the equation, because they can see this as something very profitable. So they show there in this documentary how the people that are involved in human trafficking and all these things, now they're getting into the fishing business as these things, are being protected and so forth. So we need to be careful how we treat, the environment that we have around us. I find it very insightful here. Psalms 8 says, "You made them rulers over the works of your hands. You put everything under their feet, all flocks and herds, all the animals of the wild, the birds in the sky." And what else? "The fish in the sea, all that swim the paths of the seas." We have a responsibility in our environment. We need to take care of all the things that God has given us, including, is mentioned there, even the fish in the sea. So, doctor, if we don't eat omega-3 from fish, where are we going to eat it? There is plenty of sources. In fact, you're going to eat it from where the fish gets it. See, fish don't generate omega-3. So where do they eat it? Where do they get it? From what they are eating. The algae, it's a very good source of omega-3. That's where the fish or something, that the fish ate that, and that's where the fish gets that omega-3. So in things like almonds, spinach, green soybeans, soybean oil, wet germ oil, walnuts, the English walnuts or the black walnuts, chia seeds, and the king of the omega-3 is the linseed or flax seed. Very, very high concentrated amount. We prefer the grind flaxseed than the flaxseed oil. And the reason being is that when you grind the flaxseed, you also have that tryptophan. And tryptophan is what makes this chemical of your brain called serotonin. And somebody with depression has low levels of serotonin. So we want to feed our brain that tryptophan, and that's going to bump our serotonin, which is going to make us feel much better. And another groups of foods that are also omega-3 rich include whole wheat bread, cucumbers, potatoes, apples, bananas, sweet potatoes, safflower oil, turnips, and California avocados, the little one, not the big one. The little one tends to be nice and high in omega-3. So the Eskimos, sometimes you're going to see in the internet, oh, what about the Eskimos? They eat, so much fish and so forth. So they are actually not the healthiest population. Eskimos from Alaska and Canada have very high rates of degenerative diseases due to the toxins. And even though they eat quite a bit of cholesterol, their cholesterol tend to be low due to their high intake of fish. But they're still higher than the vegetarian populations regarding their heart disease. So what we need to do, we need to use that omega-3 wisely. So if you're going to be cutting off the fish and so forth, what you need to be doing, you need to be eating those high omega-3 foods on a regular basis. Now, there's different forms of omega-3. As you eat enough of that omega-3, the body will start transforming into the different subtypes. So when you have this omega-3 type of supplement, if you want something a little bit more high in level, there are some omega-3 that is made with algae. One commercial brand that we like to use, I don't sell it, but we like to use that, is one that is called Opti3. That's how you find it online. And this very interesting study was showing how omega-3 was actually very beneficial for people with ulcerative colitis. It was shown that the people that were taking that concentrated form of omega-3, they actually improved quite a bit. And that's something that you can potentially use. Another thing that you want to concentrate is that tryptophan that we mentioned. And as a side note, people with maniac depression, studies show that high levels of omega-3 can help stabilize some of that maniac depression. You want to be taking 3 milligrams of omega-3 daily. And this one also is interesting. When you see, for example, the cholesterol problem is something that is very much a problem here in Australia, because we're seeing more cases of heart attacks and strokes. In fact, that's the #1 killer here in Australia. So we need to watch out for things that have cholesterol. So what problems are there with fish and fish oil? We know there's studies that show that diabetics that eat the fish oil or fish, their blood sugar actually can worsen. And also, we mentioned omega-3 can help the blood not to clot, but if you take too much of that fish oil, studies show you get the opposite effect, and now the blood starts clotting much more. Also, fish oil is not something that is cheap, it's something that is expensive. So when you compare the price of fish oil with vegetable oil, you'll see the vegetable oil is much better. And also, some of these fish oil concentrations have certain vitamins, and you can actually get a vitamin overloading if you take too much of this fish oil. And another thing is that certain infections can also get jumped there and you get exposed to that. And the most worrisome part why we don't recommend that fish oil is that you saw the toxins that accumulate there. See, the toxins accumulate in the muscle of the fish, and as you are making the fish oil, you have a lot of fish that you're extracting that oil from. And what are you doing? You're not only concentrating the oil, you're concentrating what else? The toxins that were in that fish. So unfortunately, that's the problem that we have today in the world that we live in with such high levels of toxicity. That's the problem. And also watch out for warnings. Here in Australia, this is not that big of a problem, but if you go up in Asia, you're going to see this sometimes. Certain beaches that they close because they detected, pollution and so forth. So you can actually end up getting an infection of your gastric system. You can end up getting that type of diarrhea that is even bloody, hepatitis, and other, because many times they throw the sewage there to the water without properly treating that. So as you're swimming in that water, you can get exposed to that type of problems. Or sometimes the houses are supposed to have these septic systems, but again, in countries that don't have the standards of Australia, they're not working well, and this thing is leaking. So all that stuff end up in rivers or the ocean, and then the rivers carry the stuff there to the ocean, and then you're swimming there, and then you expose yourself to that. Or also boating waste, as they are painting the boats and this type of thing. So then those chemicals leak there, and that can be potentially problematic. Or also, if they do a lot of industrial farming, these places where they have a ton of chickens in one place, imagine that. Rains come, they wash all that stuff into the water, and if you are swimming in that type of places, you can be potentially polluted with that. So some of the things that are worrisome, as we mentioned, is that you can concentrate 1 million times the little amount of toxin that was in that water as you eat the fish that lives in that water, 1 million times more concentrated. And those toxins go to the muscle, which is full of this fatty tissue. So as you analyze that fatty tissue, you find all kinds of varieties of toxins there. So also, it can be contaminated with those PCBs, some heavy metals like mercury, petroleum byproducts, and halogenic organic compounds, and even some lead you can find in certain of these products. So this is something that has been found. This is published studies that they have found out that females with breast cancer, some of them tend to have higher levels of pesticides. And that's what we believe, that they may be, related to triggering or worsening that breast cancer. That's why you do not want to have that. And the National Cancer Institute, they did a very interesting study in which they found out that the cancer rates of the areas where fish have a lot of tumors, you find more tumors among the humans. So that's why we think, there's possibly a relationship there. So fish have more cancer now than 50 years ago. If you go and talk to an experienced fisherman, they're going to tell you that. As they're checking the fish and so forth, you see these tumors going on there. Just in America, this Lake Erie, you find that 30% of that bullheads, they have liver cancer. I mean, 30%, that's a big, big number. And that's the cancer you can see. Sometimes the cancer is there, but you actually cannot see that cancer, so potentially can be even bigger than that. And another worrisome factor is that those PCVs can affect the reproductive system. So those PCBs, the major exposure today, how people get them? By eating fish. That's how you're going to end up getting them. So males that have them, their sperm quality decreases, their sperm count decreases also. And not only the males, when females that are pregnant are eating this PCB contaminated fish, they can affect the size of the baby, they can have premature births, and potentially affecting that baby. Children at the age of 11 exposed to that PCB before birth, they have problems in their intellectual development, exactly replicating the results of the Faroe Islands documentary that I just mentioned some minutes ago. So the other challenge is that overfishing. We are just overfishing too much our oceans. And the problem is that more and more fish people ask for, so they don't give enough time for the stocks to recover. And now you see, fish coming from faraway nations trying to find fish, and sometimes fishing in protected areas like sanctuaries and so forth, as the fish in other places are decreasing. And here you can see how we are seeing a decrease in the capacity. So 70% the decrease in the amount of fish that they used to fish in the past. So here is the vicious cycle that happens. So you have these very high efficient methods to catch as much fish as possible. Well, they work, so they end up catching a lot much more fish. And that causes much more abundance of fish, therefore lowering the price of the market. Now the fishermen make less money, so that means they need to catch even more fish. So then through technology, they create all these nets and methods to catch even more fish, and then you end up getting this vicious cycle. And because you're fishing so much fish, then you end up decimating tremendously the fish population and all this waste that occurs like that, and you get into this cycle that we need to break, or we're going to damage permanently our oceans. So that end up affecting not only the fish, there's fish that help the reef to be healthy by eating certain things that stimulate the growth of the reef, by also the destruction of vegetables of the ocean. Those boats that are pulling everything from the bottom, they also take away the vegetation that is there. And that's how environmentalists describe this. They live literally deserts in the ocean, nothing growing there, and that's not good, because as the fish stocks are trying to recover, there's no food for them and so forth, so it takes even longer than in the old days. And that's the issue, that the industry, they actually, there's a lot of economy interest there. So that overfishing could kill oceans by 2050, they say the estimates, So that's the challenge, As we continue to decimate our oceans, we all lose. All of us lose because of that. And this is something that can be addressed by banning things like this bottom trawling, the one that I told you. They put the nets all the way on the bottom and they just pull everything. This is tremendously destructive to the oceans, and this is something that needs to stop. And then also what they call the IUU type of fishing, which is illegal, underreported, and unregulated fishing, in which the fish, go there and end up catching fish where they're not supposed to, certain places that are supposed to be protected, and so forth. And then the other problem is that many times they catch a bunch of fish that is not useful. You cannot eat it or something like that, and you need to throw away that, and that is no longer good, and you just decimated the oceans secondary to that. And this pelagic trawling is this one in which they tow this trawl net through the water column, and sometimes it's just one fish, sometimes it's many fish that are pulling like that, and they're just taking everything on its way, tremendously destructive way. And of course the bycatch, in which you're fishing something, but then you end up catching the turtles and all kinds of dolphins and so forth that are there, and you're not allowed to, do commerce with them, so they just throw them back on the ocean. Now they're dead, and no good for that. So what we need to do, we need to start making changes so that we can stop that, and we don't end up like the dodo, that got extinct by so much overfishing. So in closing, I just want to show you this. This is if you're interested in further reading on the subject. These are excellent resources that can tell you more about the problem of overfishing and the realities that we are facing, and how we need to make major changes. If not, we're going to see some really, really bad consequences. How convicted I am about this? Last time I ate fish was 30 years ago. That's how convicted I am about this. And I grew up in front of the ocean. The sun would set up in front of the ocean where I grew up. So I'm trying to teach you by example. So thank you very much. And I hope to see you tomorrow. We're going to be dealing with an excellent source that we have to get rid of toxins. So don't miss tomorrow's lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Eddie. Another rude awakening about something that might have to go. But I'm all into alternatives and things you can do to replace things. So Dr. Eddie talked quite extensively about getting the right sources of omega-3. And omega-3 is incredibly good for you. In fact, the flaxseed, the ground flaxseed, you actually can buy it in Woolies. It's called flaxseed. I saw some today. I almost bought a packet, and I would have been able to show you the packet. But it's a macro packet in their health area, and it's not very expensive, about $3 for half a kilo. But it must be ground for you to get any benefit from it. Okay, so you have to put it into either a bullet or a coffee grinder. And the easy way to get it in, because it's so incredibly good for us, it gives us good health, good brain health. It's very good for your mood and very, very good for your memory. Both flaxseed and chia seeds, very, very good for your mood and your memory. And so chia seeds look like this. They're available in Woolies or in Coles or Aldi. Even this is an Aldi packet, and you can do things with it, like make it into a chia pudding. Those of you that came to the dinner, we had our chia puddings, and that's very, very simple. It's just with some plant-based milk and some berries on the top. So the ground flaxseed looks something like that. You just grind a bit of it and leave it in your fridge. But the recommended dose for really good mental health is actually 3 tablespoons of it a day. Ground flaxseed, 3 tablespoons a day. So how to get that in? The idea is maybe you'd sprinkle a tablespoon on your porridge or your cereal or whatever, but it's really easy to get it in just a small glass of juice and just stir it in. But the idea is it's gel forming, so you have to go glug, 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 glug and get it down really quickly. Don't wait, just stir it and get it down. But the benefits are immense. So for those of you that might be thinking, oh no, there goes my fish. I want to show you there are alternatives. Who's heard of lamb yong? Lamb yong? Lamb yong is a Malaysian company, I think, and they have a lot of plant-based food in lamb yong. They have, sort of meat replacement type foods. They have chicken replacement. They have they have all sorts of things, but they have this one called chunky fish, so you don't have to do without your fish. So there you go and get yourself some lamb yong fish. This is actually particularly nice. You can even fry pieces of it, and away you go. So I hope that's been helpful. We've got some yummy things to taste again tonight, so come on out. But before we do, it's really nice to see more of you here this evening. And if you enjoyed what Dr. Eddie had to offer, you have just a couple more opportunities to hear him. Tomorrow night, same time, same place. He'll be on again at 7 o'clock. He has been doing lifestyle coaching sessions, and a few of you have taken advantage of that. And there's a couple of slots left. So if any of you are thinking, hey, I've got a health challenge that I'd like some lifestyle advice on, you might be able to just book a small 15-minute coaching segment. So come and see Lynn at the desk, and she'll be able to book you in. There's only 2 or 3 left for the tomorrow evening. And of course, on Saturday morning, he's speaking at around 9:30. We'll have a little bit of our normal preliminaries there, but we'll about 9:45 he'll be speaking, and again at 11, and that will be our portion of Eddie for this year so far. So if you've enjoyed him, then go and get somebody else to come with you. We're really delighted to see more of you here this evening. Please come out and join us for some refreshments. We've enjoyed having you along. Thank you, Dr. Eddie, for your incredible information.